All right, cool. So yeah, just hang out. We'll have food for you. Great idea from Josh Corman, who is going to take over, talk to us, maybe scare us a little bit, and go ahead.
All right, thank you. All right, I don't love being stuck to podiums, but I will try my best. I can. Yeah, I'll still be on a leash a little bit. All right. Who's ready to play a game? This requires audience participation. Okay. Thank you for having me here. I'm so glad we met in DC and have this opportunity. And part of this is an advertisement to take some free training from Idaho National Labs, cyber-informed engineering, or as I like to call it, consequence-informed engineering, after the dinner break. And because we have de-risked your attrition rate with pizza, I think everyone should take advantage of this amazing, very bespoke, focused training. So we're not going to make you experts on the entire body of work, but we might make you expert enough to maybe protect your family. So we're going to get pretty real here. I appreciate the warning that I might scare you, but I want to preface this. I hate FUD. I hate the use of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. The fact that we have used fear, uncertainty, and doubt as a lazy cudgel for 30 years in cybersecurity is actually undermining us at a time when things are actually quite scary. So I want you to be comfortable with some discomfort. We're going to talk about some scary things, but I'm not going to exaggerate things. I might stretch a point to make a point today because I'm feeling a little spicy, but push back on me during the break or discussion. This is a little bit like a Ramones concert where there's way too much content and way too little time, but that's kind of how we're going to roll today. And let's get started. So you'll see this graphic again. This is a water hammer. Anybody here an engineer in the fluid engineer or understand fluid dynamics or physics? All right. We'll give you a little preview later as to why I picked this. But the key phrase here is no water, no hospitals, no kidding. Pretty damn soon too. If we just stay on the current course and path. I'm Josh. I have a lot of hats. I'm not going to read this to you. Basically, I'm a formally trained philosopher that's been in the hacker culture for 30 years. I kind of went up in the corporate world through like CISO, Chief Product Security Officer, CTO, CSO. But I also got bit by the public good bug when I saw the rise of anonymous and hacktivism. And a lot of the stuff I was finding in my philosophy was not useless. It was pretty unique in this space. And the intelligence community kept asking, how are you predicting all these things? And I was really worried about things like cyber terrorism coming out of Anonymous, and it did. A kid, an honor student born in Birmingham, UK, was a part of Team Poison, an anonymous group. They hacked Tony Blair's website while in jail. So basically a script kiddie, but while in jail, radicalized, joined ISIS, and moved his punk rock band wife and newborn to Raqqa, Syria, where he started the cyber caliphate. He was helping to use his social media skills to recruit and train people online to kill dissidents. To kill infidels. And he was not doing a ton of hacking, although he was recruiting and training hackers, but he was also organizing things like the Garland Texas shootings. So I was deeply concerned what these things meant for national security, public safety. And while hacker philosophers do not belong anywhere near the federal government, in some ways, I found myself increasingly put there. Eventually, after a pretty decent story, and then when if the cameras stop or if people ask me during the cocktail hour, maybe I'll tell you some of the cavalry origin story. But I got about as high and deep as you can in the federal government, and we were briefing some of the intelligence community for 2 days. I picked 5 of the best hackers I could think of with the most diverse skills, people like Dan Kaminsky and H.D. Moore. And we had to answer some challenge questions. We came up with some incredibly breathtaking hacker-informed solutions to some national security growing threats. And at the end of the 2 days, the answer was, we can't do that one. There's no statutory authority for this one. People would have to die first for that one. And we got down a really long list of incredibly good solutions that weren't going to happen anytime soon. So I said to the crew at the airport, I broke the silence after a long period of no talking. I said, hey guys, the cavalry isn't coming. No one's going to fix this for us. What I didn't tell them is I had learned my mom stroke was not just a stroke. It was pretty aggressive brain cancer. And we slowly hospiced her over the next several months. And during her funeral, something popped in my head where I'm like, maybe if something's missing in the world, maybe we got to put it there. So like that kind of completed the thought that if the cavalry isn't coming, maybe what am I willing and able to do? So I went to the hacker conferences, that's Hacker Summer Camp, August 12 years ago. And I said, hey, our dependence on connected technology is growing a lot faster than our ability to secure it. We can't protect credit cards or websites, but we're putting the same software in cars, medical devices, industrial control systems. You know, people are going to get hurt. So how do we be a voice of reason, a helping hand? How do we raise the alarm without being alarmist? And how do we maybe use hacking to save people? So we tried a pretty different approach, and IamTheCavalry.org was born. We had some success with that, so we got into specifically a separate nonprofit called Cyber Med Summit, where we do ER hacking simulations. So doctors train on an ER all the time, just like pilots train in a flight simulator. They do. If you have a pregnant woman come in that needs a defibrillator, what do you do when there's 2 heartbeats? Well, you drill for this. So these drills, these randomized ER drills, had a little spice added to it, which is we use known hackable medical devices to interfere with patient care delivery. And every single time people die in the simulations. So this became really palpable because instead of us just preaching at this industry, we got on the ground, we met them where they are, we learned their love language, we do simulations for things they already care about, and we shatter their assumptions, and then we have meaningful collaboration to find things that can work within their world. Some of this good deed was punished. When CISA, the newest federal agency, experienced the pandemic, they used the CARES Act hiring authority. My friend made that poster, not me. So I got tapped to quarterback the national response for the pandemic for CISA, or the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, in support of Operation Warp Speed, which was for the vaccines, diagnostic therapeutics, to keep Americans alive, but also record high disruptions on hospitals and their supply chains. And while we were at it, we kind of turned into not just a cyber risk management fusion center, but an all hazards for anything lifeline, because we had alleged hacks of the Oldsmore water facilities. We had attacks on Americold, the largest cold chain storage facilities in the country. We had attacks on JBS meat supply, so the food supply, which was 30 to 40% of meat products in the US. So we kind of figured out the overwhelming majority of these national critical functions, as said during the opening, these 55 national critical functions, most of these players are target rich but cyber poor. So they can't do NIST cybersecurity best practices. They can't implement zero trust. They can't even spell IOC, let alone, do hand-to-hand combat with another group. So it was really like Marie Antoinette saying, if there's no more bread, let them eat cake. So I said, screw best practices. And we did things like bad practices, the 3 most dangerous things. Or get your shit off Shodan, but I couldn't say shit, or I couldn't say Shodan. So it was get your stuff off Surge. Your assets are showing, see what your adversaries can see, remove the things you don't need, harden the things you do need, rinse and repeat, maybe run the free nightly scan from CISA. And if that tells you too much, because they said there's too many CVEs naked on the internet, we said, well, it's kind of a problem, but why don't you fix the kevs? So we started publishing this thing called the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities List. So I brought an incredible ruthless prioritization for pragmatism down to these target rich but cyber poor. Oh, you want that picture again? Sorry, you'll see it again. So I think this experience broke me in a lot of ways because I have all the talent and agility and curiosity of a private sector person, but I was stuck in a big bureaucracy of the federal government, which is really not well oiled for cross-sector collaboration, across multifunctional teams, multifunctional problems, and most risk manifests down market in cross-sector ways. So I kind of don't belong in the private sector anymore because I care about the public good too much and really big scale problems, but I also don't belong in government because I'm a little too nimble and anti-bureaucratic. So this ultimately all led me to a project I'm going to spend a little bit of time on today through a game, and the project's called Undisruptible 27, and we will get into why. But when everything's critical, nothing is. And under incredible duress, we better focus on the things that can't fail, or where our downtime tolerance is incredibly low. Things like water, power, food, access to emergency care. If you squint past most of the cavalry manifestations in most of my career, it usually boils down to something resembling on screen, but I'm not going to read it verbatim. But basically, we're over-dependent on undependable things. And through that mismatch, it exposes us to accidents like the CrowdStrike outage last summer, or adversaries that want money. But increasingly, there's more disruptions, larger disruptions, longer disruptions, more life safety disruptions. But what if we have a war? It could be a cold war, a warm war, a hot war, a tepid war, pick your favorite continuum. But these are also weapons of war. And as of January 31st, 2024, in public, in an unclassified way, we now know there are cyber weapons of war in non-combatant civilian U.S. infrastructure, some of the very weak ones that I'm very concerned about. So we're eventually going to get this right, where we should only be as dependent as something is dependable. That means we have to be more trustworthy, more transparent, more accountable than we currently are. It's going to take a while to get there. So we had this overdependent stage, and we're going to have a right-sized dependence to dependability. But the middle is going to get messy. And unfortunately, right in the middle of that messy period, we're going to have some hybrid conflict. Am I talking too fast? All right. It's a pretty intelligent crowd. So let's play a game. Who has not seen WarGames? All right, please. Your life is about to get so much better. Please take the homework assignment. WarGames changed U.S. policy. It helped end the Cold War with Russia initially. We have new ones now. But it was so humbling to national security people and Ronald Reagan that it changed the way we approached that super great power conflict contest. So in the movie, spoilers, there's a supercomputer, early AI, I guess. It's named Whopper or Joshua. I am Joshua. Shall we play a game? I need your consent. Okay. So unlike chess, checkers, and global thermonuclear warfare, we're going to play a really fast set of games. Here's the games. There'll be a couple quizzes. Each quiz gets harder. The faster you answer, the better this talk goes. Don't overthink it, okay? And I'd like you to answer as a citizen mostly. And this talk wasn't aimed at you, but I'm still going to try it on you to see what it reveals. It was aimed at the RSA conference, the largest collection of cybersecurity talent in the world, all at once. DEF CON is obviously the largest collection of researcher talent, but, you know, by volume, by dollar, by whatever, I really had a hard message to drive home to RSA. Let's see how it lands with you, okay? Okay, what is more important, PCI data or PHI data? Raise your hand for PCI. Raise your hand for PHI. Okay, so I care about more health data. What's more important, intellectual property or PHI? Raise your hand for IP. Raise your hand for PHI. Okay. What's more important, your medical records or your medical records? So that's the first sort of trick to curveball. Is it more important that they stay confidential or more important that they stay available? Availability? Okay, okay. What's more important, your wallet or your life? It better be the Samuel L. Jackson wallet from Pulp Fiction. All right, all right. All right. What's more important, the needs of the many or the needs of the few? Depends on which Star Trek movie you're talking about. All right. All right. So basically what I heard from you, and with a little margin of error here, is if we made a Maslow's hierarchy of data assets, you know, PCI is the most replaceable. If you lose your credit card, you don't even pay a fine anymore. It's an inconvenience. But if you lose your PII, maybe it could be used for something else. IP is important for some people. PHI, confidentiality. You know, we don't want our medical history getting out, but if you can't get your blood type or your chemotherapy cocktail, your medical history, that could be bad. And if the hospital can't run, that could be really bad. So I kind of heard that the most important stuff, the bottom of Maslow's, is down there, right? So I said at the RSA conference, so why have we done the exact opposite prioritization for 30 years? And then you could hear a pin drop because it's true. And part of the answer, but not the whole answer, is you're sent there by your employer for your private good of your enterprise security. You align yourself to the business for shareholder value, which is always going to be a local good versus a greater good. But when you put your hat on of what happens to my town, my family, your priorities are way out of whack with that. It doesn't mean that we're good people or bad people. I'm not trying to moralize this. It's just, this has been an accidental bias. We can temper it and put some of our skills and talent to our very communities. So we'll come back to that. I'm not trying to bludgeon anybody, but I'm trying to cause them to think. And I didn't tell them what was important. They told me what was important. Let's do the same game, but for national critical functions. I'm so glad you mentioned the exact right phrases in the opening. I wish I had actually put a few more things in here because I'm giving snippets from a longer, like, Schoolhouse Rock's tutorial on national critical functions. Okay, here we go. During President Obama's time in the White House, there was Presidential Policy Directive 21, PPD 21. It's now been slightly replaced with NSM 23, National Security Memorandum 23. They barely changed anything. But for the longest time, you've heard that we have 16 designated critical infrastructure sectors. Those silos with brick walls are those 16. They're things like water and wastewater, things like healthcare and public health, things like nuclear reactors and waste. Each one of them has a PPP, a public-private partnership. There will not be a quiz on these things later. Each one has a GCC, which is a government coordinating council, and an SCC, which is a sector coordinating council. And they're supposed to like arm wrestle and have it out for where public good and private good come into tension. So what's right for Exxon versus what's right for the Eastern Seaboard. Or I probably should have used Colonial Pipeline. You know, they did what was right for shareholders, not what was right for the Eastern Seaboard. So when those things come into tension, they're supposed to work it out. Each one has an ISAC in theory, which is a more technical operational information sharing and analysis center. I said in theory because they don't all have one, and they're not evenly developed. So that's generally how we approach critical infrastructure risk management, is in a very siloed, isolated way. And by the way, whenever CISA tried to help, they don't exist yet when this was born. The answer was stay out of our lane. Why are you in our lane? Get out of our lane, right? So then comes CISA, and they did a lot of things, but CISA was supposed to be a shared resource pool of cybersecurity talent, physical security talent, and national risk management talent for emergency comms and things. But one of the innovations the National Risk Management Center did is said you can't manage risk at a sector level. Within healthcare and public health, you have mortuaries down here and Merck up here, Merck Biopharmaceutical. You have really big hospitals like the Mayo Clinic, and you got tiny rural hospitals. You have medical device maker giants like GE Medical or Medtronic, and you got 999 or what is it? There's 100,000, 10,000 medical device makers. 100 of them are large, 10 of them are huge. So they have very little in common if you try to do risk management at the sector level. But these national critical functions are atomic service level, utility level bounded objects. It's things like supply drinking water. So it's either, it's a service level that you could say it's full capacity with excess, full service availability with excess capacity, full service with no excess, minor degradation, major degradation, full service outage. And you can stitch them together. You could say a level 2 outage of water might cause 5 level 3 outages of hospitals, for example. So these are not perfect. There's 55 of them. Some of them are very useful. Some of them are really head scratchy. Some of them are completely missing. But these things are more bounded, tractable unit of risk. There's uglier presentations I chose not to include today, but those national critical functions are basically where the rubber meets the road, and some of them are inherently cross-sector, unfortunately. So if you take Maslow's hierarchy of needs for functions, let's do your quiz again. Stuff at the bottom is I want to write poetry and create iPhones, but I can't if I fear for my food, shelter, safety for my family, right? We only act at the level we feel most secure. By the way, academics in the room, he never actually painted his body of work as a pyramid, but that's fine. All right, so let's play that game again. And your reminder of, we already know your life is more important than your wallet. So let's play this game with some of the handful of national critical functions out of the 55. What's more important, support banking or provide fuel for the Eastern Seaboard? Okay. What's more important, provide electricity or provide food? Raise your hand for electricity. That was close. For food? Okay. Reasonable people could disagree. We could measure these. I'm a quasi-academic. What? Yeah. Yeah. What's more important, provide water or provide food? Yeah, you can go 3 minutes without breathing. You can go 3 days without water. You can go 30 days without food. It's not pleasant, but you can do it. What's more important, provide water or provide medical care? Okay. What's more important, protect sensitive information, PHI, or provide medical care? So why do we have the HIPAA security rule for 20 years? Yeah. Yeah, hospitals are responsible for 4 national critical functions. Protect sensitive information, which in the case of hospitals is PHI. Maintain access to medical records, which is the availability of the said same things. We fail at that one every time. Provide medical care, which is get timely access to patient care when and where you need it. And support community health, which says it's okay if one's down a little while in your town or county, as long as there's sufficient capacity to support the community's needs. So what irritates me, upsets me, infuriates me is every time you see a hospital in the news and they've been helped by one of the big fancy IR firms, then they take a cut and paste media message. They say something almost identical to the following. In an abundance of caution, and in accordance with industry standard best practices, we've decided to shut down patient care operations to contain the breach and maintain our customers' privacy. And what they just did is they took an already horse out of the barn privacy violation on HIPAA, and they self-inflicted a delayed, denied, degraded patient care where minutes or hours could be the difference in life and death. Because they shut down patient operations, they shut down cash flow. And if they do it long enough, they could close their doors forever, as we've seen with 1,000 hospitals. So during the pandemic on October 1st, 2021, my team published the first qualitative and quantitative proof of loss of life from ransomware events on the excess strains of the pandemic, with incredible focus on CDC morbidity mortality rates and something called excess deaths. We were able to see a natural experiment where the state of Vermont was shut down for a protracted amount of time. We could see in the same pandemic with the same state, with the same conditions and environmental factors, regions affected by ransomware achieved excess death stress levels sooner and stay there longer than their peers in the state. And we could localize down to the county level with corroborated data for time-sensitive conditions like heart, brain, and pulmonary, where downtime tolerance was low. We then published 6 weeks later the data science in the CDC morbidity mortality weekly report. So we had peer-reviewed hard good data to show that this is not a victimless crime. It's not a HIPAA violation. It's a loss of life crime. On the same day that we published, the front page of the Wall Street Journal had the first named victim. A 2019 ransom finally was making its way through the court system, where an Alabama hospital was affected by ransomware and had a lot of their equipment not functioning. They still continued to admit patients at the normal rate to figure they could muscle through it. And a baby was brought in, a pregnant mother was brought in. They didn't have the imaging to notice the umbilical cord wrapped around their neck. So they were able to deliver the patient eventually, and the patient survived and spent some time in the natal intensive care unit. We're surrounded by a dozen or more technologies that we now use to scale nurse to patient ratios from 1 to 1, as it was in the 90s, to more like 5, 9, 12, 18, 15. So these modern technologies are a force multiplier for our medical staff. The unavailability of those is a force divider, and patient care suffers. And doctors and nurses were texting that they never should have admitted the patients with complicated cases, or they should have admitted fewer, so they're probably going to lose or settle. So you have statistical proof of loss of life, named with a combined sympathetic human story. We are over-dependent on undependable technologies, which can affect public safety and human life. I used to think the hardest part was getting a law passed to make the first mandatory minimum cybersecurity hygiene for any IT or software, which we did. Some of that data I talked about, we testified to the Senate to pass the Patch Act through the omnibus package, which is now 524B law. So to bring a new medical device to market, you have to do certain things like have a coordinated vulnerability disclosure program working with good faith researchers. You have to have a machine generated, machine readable, self-secure software bill of materials, or SBOM. You have to have a vulnerability management program. You have to have a threat model on file. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you now must do to be responsible, trustworthy, transparent digital infrastructure for medical devices. And we were trying to catch up on hospitals. What we realized is, this is a real humbling event, is that while we're focused on hospital minimum hygiene, where they have no money, they're target rich but cyber poor for 85% of these hospitals. They don't have a single cybersecurity person on staff, not one. 85% don't have a single cybersecurity person on staff. How are they going to do hand-to-hand combat with well-oiled, well-funded criminal enterprises or worse nation states? So the scary part was the St. Margaret's Hospital in Illinois shut its doors forever. They're not the first hospital to close. A lot of financial ruin, independent of cyber, is closing the nation's hospitals. But they're the first ones to publicly admit that their ransom event was a key contributing cause of their death. And when you scratch the surface pretty quickly, Becker's, which studies the financial viability of all hospitals, they point out that there's like another 800 hospitals at severe risk of closing their doors forever right now this year. And one of the reasons is they have 4 to 6 weeks of cash flow reserve on hand. So not only can that ransom hurt you and your family during the ransom while we're trying to restore services, but if it's down long enough, there's no cash flow. And that hospital either closes its doors for good or gets bought by a private equity firm and ruined. So this is maybe isolated, right? Anecdotal, but my wife and I looked at the UNC data, and she made this animated GIF of every single one of these dots in a time lapse is a hospital that's closed forever. So when I was asked to serve on the Congressional Task Force for Healthcare in 2016, we had 7,000 hospitals. If you talk to anybody in the public policy right now, we have 6,000 hospitals. We're down 1,000 of the 7,000 in just a couple of years. That's mostly financial, late stage capitalism, but some of it has been accelerated by ransom events. In fact, when I tried to bring some really common sense pragmatism to the big hospital trade associations, some of them said, Josh, we're not going to push for that. These ransoms are great for us. We get to buy hospitals cheaper now. Oh, this is from a couple of years old. Yeah. So these are bad when they hit individual hospitals. And remember the Change Healthcare breach from last February. Change Healthcare was a common mode failure, a shared overdependence on undependable things, unsound risk concentration, where one payment middleware serviced 75% of the nation's hospitals and 75% of the nation's pharmacies. So one breach and the downtime affected by that probably should have crippled another several hundred hospitals that were on the ropes, but there were some emergency bailout loans and some predatory loans. So we're kind of flirting with some of the most important things we need, like getting access to our families. So I ask you again, what's more important, protect sensitive information, PHI through HIPAA, or provide medical care? Yeah, HIPAA kills people. It's not the intention, but it's the outcome. We have zero incentive to keep people alive and keep the patients flowing. We have every incentive to shut down patient care to preserve the privacy that's already left the building. So I get really pissed about that section. So it slows me down a little bit in my rhythm. But back to this Maslow's hierarchy. There's about, out of those 55 national critical functions, as I said at the top, and I think you were nodding vigorously, when everything's critical, nothing's critical. We have to have ruthless prioritization. There's different lenses we could use. I'm going to use one today. Latency tolerance. What's your downtime tolerance? How long can this service be off before people die or lose crisis of confidence? The public turn to Lord of the Flies. Humans kind of go cuckoo after about 48 hours of not having the things they need for their basic human survival. Maybe you get an extra day, but it's not an indefinite tolerance level. And when you look at those 55, there's only about a dozen that if you shut them off for 24, 48 hours a week, do people die? And do you have that crisis of confidence? Don't try to read them. I'll give you the slides later, but there are things like provide water, provide medical care, generate electricity. Your community might have a slightly higher than average downtime tolerance. Your community might have a slightly lower. It might depend on the time of year. No air conditioning in Arizona in June when it's 117 degrees, you're in an all glass building, you got to evacuate that building in 45 minutes. Extreme cold and no heat, you're going to have some exposure for some elderly people. So these things can be, subject to some variation, but there's about a dozen out of those 55 that if you shut them off, people die. Not only are they atomically important, they're highly interdependent. So those silos I showed you for the way the federal government approaches these as silos that should not be crossed over. No water means no hospital in about 2 to 4 hours. No HVAC, no sterilization, no surgery scrubbing, no nothing. So it's almost like the fire triad. If you take away any one of the three things you need to make fire, you don't have a fire anymore. You take away any one of these dependent national critical functions, you don't have a hospital anymore. So one of the most dangerous of all of them is provide medical care, because once you can't care for your sick and wounded, it has a positive feedback loop with negative consequences. We saw this during the pandemic. Some of the reasons we had excess deaths amongst our water and wastewater chemical engineers, which are incredibly few across the country, or specialized workforce like in the port of LA, getting shipping containers off of ports, or medical grade oxygen manufacturing, it's because some of these specialized workforce were sick and dying, or had family members sick and dying because they couldn't get timely access to medical care. So if we lose too much of those critical infrastructure workforce, the essential critical infrastructure workforce, I was very worried that the country would stop functioning if we had much more. If we had another Delta variant, it would have been pretty much lights out for a couple of industries. So a lot of that honed me for that revelation on January 31st of last year, which is a public hearing about Volt Typhoon. There's lots of typhoons. They're terribly named. I wish I could strangle the people that decided to make cute names out of all these things, because it's really hurting cognition. There's a lot of typhoons. The Salt one's the most embarrassing for the US government, but it's also normal. There's certain norms, and spies spy, and it's acceptable for countries, spy agencies to spy on each other. What is not acceptable is Volt Typhoon. It's a military unit and the People's Liberation Army targeting U.S. non-combatant civilian infrastructure, which is outrageous. So they have initial access campaigns that have been found in tons of U.S. water and power. The Volt is the power part. They're not targeting hospitals, but they're going to kill a lot of people in hospitals anyhow by accident. So I said, we have very little time. We'll get into why that is, but we'll talk about consequences in a minute. Yes, I think so. And part of my mission is to remind them that they may have an amplified blast radius that they attempt. All right, so consequences. Trying to go faster here. Because I know there's a capture the flag going on, I didn't want to take any risks. I'm offline right now, so I'm going to play 2 videos. I'll play 1 video for you. So let's talk about consequences. Hopefully you'll hear this. Give me a thumbs up if you can't, if you can, rather. Ready?
Picture a hospital. Picture your hospital. When was the last time you were there? Was it to welcome a baby into the world or to say goodbye to a loved one? No one wants to need a hospital. But when we do, we depend on timely access to care, when and where we need it. Irrespective of cause, delayed and degraded care for time-sensitive conditions can affect worsened outcomes and even loss of life. A 5-minute longer ambulance ride has a significant impact on 30-day mortality rates. Time is brain, where even an hour or few could determine if you walk again, if you talk again, if you even survive. Now picture your hospital. What if that hospital was not available to you? If your hospital was disrupted, where would you go instead? Is it across town? More than an hour away? What if they are also down? The chance is not as remote as you'd hope. Hospitals have become a top target of ransomware, cyber attacks that cripple technologies in the vital path of care delivery. Worse, your hospital doesn't even need to be the one attacked to endanger you or your family. We've seen a 10-fold decrease in favorable outcomes for heart patients merely due to excess strains of a ransomware-affected region. Now back to your hospital, back to your family. You and your family deserve better. If we want timely access to patient care and more resilience in the face of accidents and adversaries, we're going to need to advocate for ourselves, now. As we head into an era of hybrid conflict with threats to water and power, these disruptions stand to get a lot worse, but we'll talk about that in another video.
I don't live here, so I don't know how much resilience you have and where your next nearest hospital is, but it's something worth considering increasingly as we've seen more and more hospitals shut their doors forever. This is a water hammer. Does anybody know what a water hammer is? All right. Keep me honest. So I learned what water hammers are. We've all heard them in our house or something, or an old, in the pipes, you hear like a little tapping on the radiator or something. So it's a property of physics. So the bigger forces mass times acceleration, an abrupt change in the water being on or off, depending on how big it is, can cause a hammer. They can sometimes be used on purpose and helpfully, but a water hammer can do severe damage. The bigger pressure change and the volume, the more damage. So when I asked a bunch of water engineers, what's the worst that could happen if someone took over your plant, or if you went evil one day with the access that you have, what can you do? Answers vary, but it's usually a water hammer, an overpressurization event, an underpressurization event. They're a little less concerned about poisoning, like we saw hinted at with Oldsmar, but they have a list of the worst case things they could do, and water hammer became an interesting thread I'm going to pull. It's not the only one, but I hope we're going to talk about it tonight in the training. So what they cause is, with older and aging pipes, or even new pipes, if the pressure is sufficient, you can burst a water main. That's a pretty big truck, but that's a much bigger plume of water in the street, right? You don't get to pick the time and place of a burst water main. So they may not be convenient. They may not be easy to repair, but they're pretty destructive. Bigger the water main, the more destructive. And the most important part here is this means no pressure for hydrants. This means no pressure for hospitals. So unless and until this thing gets repaired, depending on how many are broken concurrently and how quickly they could get repaired, this is their worst case scenario for something that Volt has access to do. We're not going to show a video for energy, not today. So at some point, the FUD people are saying, oh, this sounds like fear, uncertainty, and doubt. This can't be true. What about this? What about this? So we're going to tackle the top 5 whatabouts. Okay. So why would they do this? Who would do it? Why 27, et cetera, et cetera. I want to do it as fast as I can because I could get stuck here. Pretty much, I think we can all agree that if we have a war, the next war will be a hybrid war, right? So hopefully we don't have a war. Maybe no one's stupid enough to start a war with a cyber attack. But if we have a war, cyber's in play, right? So when we think about the tech people we might have a war with, China, Iran, Russia, DPRK, who's already touched water? Well, Volt Typhoon, we've already found in public record, declassified, they're in our water. Iran has the Cyber Avengers, which is technically a hacktivist subnational group that attacked Israeli-made devices from Unitronics in Pennsylvania and 21 other states after October 7th, saying you should not be using Israeli equipment, and using so it might be hazardous to you. So they defaced the equipment versus destroyed the equipment. Russia, the cyber army of Russia Reborn, was looking for criminal gains in Texas and overflowed water tanks by accident. So we know there's at least 3 of the people we could have a conflict with have reached out and touched our water. There's many, many more examples if you keep watching the news. In fact, if you watch 60 Minutes, 2 weekends ago, they covered in a 13-minute segment, Littleton, Massachusetts had Volt Typhoon found. And they spent $50,000 hoping they successfully protected themselves. And I wish they hadn't. But there's plenty of evidence that these people can reach out and touch us. I will. That's the purpose of tonight's training. Thank you please keep me honest on that. So this is from ODNI. They don't usually publish a lot publicly. They're more the coordination hub for all the intelligence agencies in the US, but they publish these 2 types of hacktivists and the footprint they had during a time range. So the blue are the Cyber Avengers hacktivist group touching the country's infrastructure, lots of water. And then the orange is hacktivists from Russia. And as we know, these are mostly state tolerated or state directed proxies, but it's not typical to see DNI publish something so detailed. So I liked it. It's a 2-pager. They point at certain things, but there's been a lot more since then. It's a very narrow time range. I think they're just trying to make a point. I think I heard their point. Okay, Y27, I've hinted at this a few times. Go watch this specific hearing. It's the 4 horsemen of the cyber apocalypse. It's Jen Easterly from CISA at the time, Christopher Wray from FBI, Harry Coker from the White House Office of National Cyber Director, and Outbound, at the time, Outbound General Nakasone from Cyber Command and NSA. And there was very little daylight between them. They made it pretty clear. It's pre-positioning. It's not an attack. It's an initial access campaign. Think of it like they have secured access in water and power such that at a time and place of their choosing, they could disrupt or destroy. The mission is twofold. Well, the backdrop is Xi Jinping has said to his army in public, we are reunifying with Taiwan. I need my military to be ready to do so as early as 2027 is the key phrase. Whether it's 27, 28, 29, 30, I'm acting as if it's 27 and we might get bonus time. Dmitry says it's going to be later. It looks like they might wait until Trump's out of office, in part because they didn't expect the bombings of the Iran facilities. So they found them a little more unpredictable. But when there was rumors of Trump having health issues, there was chatter that they might have gone faster and accelerated the timeline. So I'm just not messing around. I'm treating this like a Y2K. What is the art of the possible to be done in the time frame that we have? And if we get bonus time, fantastic. But these are all unclassified. You can watch, you can hear, and while they don't publish a lot of numbers, open source intelligence, now that they know about it, have found more stuff and see different waves of initial access campaigns through orb networks, like using TP-Link routers made in China that went from no market share to 80% of US market share in the home and small medium business, and are often used in these implicated compromised organizations. But you don't need to have a Chinese made router sold for pennies on the dollar at a loss to have this level of exposure. You can use US security products like Fortinet and Avanti, who have known exploited vulnerabilities on the edge all the time, and it's a distinction without a difference. So we are over dependent on undependable technology, and there's certain initial access campaign correlation with certain known edge devices. What about the government? Boy, this one pisses me off. There's lots of them. I change my emphasis on a different syllable depending on the day. What people don't realize is, unlike most other countries and our allies, we've delegated public good infrastructure to the private sector, most of it. So 85% was a initial swag, but it's been later borne out by math. So about 85% of the critical infrastructure that other governments are usually responsible for, they've delegated without accountability to for-profit entities. I don't care what Jen Easterly says in public. We do not have a domestic cyber defense agency. We I'll get to that in a second. We do have a cyber command. They are offense. They're out of Fort Meade and other forts. They attack out. They don't defend in. So we don't have, like, we have an army, a navy, an air force, even a space force. We don't have anyone defending the homeland in cyberspace. Executive Order 14239 from March is kind of maybe the right move eventually, but maybe terrible timing, which is just saying we need to rebalance the shared responsibility between the federal government and the states for protecting ourselves in cyberspace. And maybe it's the right move eventually. I don't think it's great timing, especially because the entity best poised to assist in such a shift of responsibility is called the multi-state ISAC, and it lost its funding concurrently with this. So they're privately seeking funding to keep doing the mission that could have been helpful for such a transition. The longer version of that stovepipe graphic I did, every one of those 16 agencies for the 16 sectors has a sector risk management agency. So for health and human services, it's health and human services. For healthcare and public health. For water and wastewater, it's the EPA. For energy sector, it's Department of Energy. They have a lawful backdoor to talk to their sector coordinating councils and ISACs to share privileged information under traffic light protocols and whatnot. It's called CPAC. CPAC was suspended in February. It hasn't been reinstituted. So they haven't had a lawful way to do the public-private partnerships, even in a voluntary capacity, since February. CISA calls itself the nation's cyber defense agency. I worked there for 18 months of the day, trying to keep everybody's hospitals safe. I'm a big fan of the concept of CISA, but it is not the nation's cyber defense agency. It can inform and advise. It can't go into your network and do things or patch for you. It's voluntary, and right now it's in a lot of trouble for a lot of reasons. Some self-inflicted, many not. Congress actually is probably the most poised to help on Volt Typhoon right now, if you can believe it. As broken as Congress is currently, and we are in shutdown and a stalemate. But generally speaking, it doesn't matter if you're talking to a Senate or a House person, a Democrat or Republican, they're all terrified by Volt Typhoon. And they're all willing and able to do something if they want. The problem with Congress is once you pass a law, it takes another year to do initial rulemaking, another couple years to roll it out. We don't have most of the things they can do, besides convene a hearing to educate the public or do an emergency funding thing, are too slow to affect the outcomes we wish within the time frame we need. So there's some support there, but very narrow support. And if someone asks me over a drink later, I'll tell you the type of things they do have an appetite for. What about insurance? Most people say, well, I would never be targeted. Well, guess what? Littleton, Mass is 10,000 people with no military value whatsoever, but they seem to have Volt Typhoon there. So I don't know why you think you wouldn't be targeted. Part of the goal, I never said this part. So Xi Jinping wants to take Taiwan back or reunify as early as 2027. The purpose of Volt Typhoon is twofold. One, delay and degrade force mobilization of troops and missiles and guns and tanks and stuff to get to the theater of conflict in the Taiwan Straits. Even a 2-day delay would be plenty of an advantage. So some of that is delay and delayed force mobilization. But the bigger one is to undermine public support for our intervention. So they believe introducing some inconvenience and pain would undermine public support for our intervention in Taiwan. Okay, so how do you do that? You're not going to target just military bases. You're going to target normal everyday civilians in different parts of the country that could push back. Insurance. I do a lot of work, and I have done a lot of work with CyberAccuView, which is a consortium of the top 25 now. It was 20 back during RSA. Underwriters of cyber insurance. Every single policy has an exception for acts of war. So a lot of people that think they'd be covered by the insurance if this happens are going to have a very bad day. And I'm really trying to encourage CyberAccuView to re-educate their population on what is and isn't covered under which conditions. Even if it's the water facility that gets hit, but the downstream effect is on the hospitals or the data centers that need the water or on the manufacturing plant, those other second and third order victims could make a claim for business continuity, business disruption insurance, or property and casualty claims, except many of those exclude harms introduced by infrastructure outages, of which a water denial would be. So there's almost nothing covered by a Volt Typhoon, and it would be fairly widespread, fairly concurrent, and almost nothing's covered. So my only takeaway from this slide is don't assume if you're an operator that your insurance covers you. Ask before your next renewal. I don't think you're going to love the answers. There's mutual assistance or mutual aid, and this is very heartening to people. So when you see a wildfire in the Palisades, many of those firefighters are from Wisconsin, they're from Texas. They fly in because they know how to snap into someone else's crisis. It's predicated on a few uncorrelated natural disasters at a time. When you have correlated unnatural disasters that happen concurrently, most people fall down. One of our best volunteers for this Undisruptible project is National Guards guy in Wisconsin. They are one of the best at doing mutual aid for cyber in the state of Wisconsin, and they can handle 3 concurrently. I said, how many hospitals and counties do you have? He said, a lot more than 3. So one of the best in the country is not really ready for these correlated unnatural disasters. Now, would they happen everywhere all at once? Probably not. But it doesn't take a lot to saturate our total capacity. So those are a couple of the thought-terminating cliches that usually pop up, and I can go deeper on any of them, but not tonight. Not until we're done in happy hour. So hammer time. Back to the water hammer. Here's video number 2 of 2. We're going to tie some of these things together.
We are too dependent on undependable technology. The systems that we rely on every day for everything from water to food to power and emergency medical care are subject to escalating harms by accidents, bad actors, and nation-state adversaries. These attacks could quickly move from disruption to destruction. For example, an intentional water hammer that abruptly stops or reverses water flow, sending a shockwave through the system. Attacks on our water systems would be devastating, not just for lack of access at home. No water means no coffee, no toilets, no laundry. No water also means no hydrants to put out fires. No water means no healthcare. The hospital can't run without clean water. No water means no sterilization, no surgery scrubbing, no laboratories, and eventually, no access to life-saving care. Our dependence on connected tech has grown faster than our ability to secure it, and there is evidence that foreign actors are already weaponizing these vulnerabilities. But who would actually do this? In public hearings, Congress and U.S. government cybersecurity leaders have warned the public of Volt Typhoon, an ongoing campaign of successful attacks on U.S. water facilities, led by a People's Republic of China state-sponsored cyber actor. But China is not the only aggressor. We've seen cyber attacks on our water systems from Russia and Iran. These attacks pose a broad and unrelenting risk to critical water infrastructure and could escalate to large-scale destructive attacks on our water systems as early as 2027. The good news is we have time to make changes. We must strive to make our lifeline basic human needs undisruptible, and where we cannot, ensure that our communities are more resilient under fire. This means divesting our reliance on connected technology, better securing our existing systems where we cannot disconnect, and ensuring analog solutions are in place when those systems fail. If this sounds overwhelming, remember, if you can't afford to protect it, you can't afford to connect it. Undisruptible 27 will prioritize.
Okay. Those are, that was pro bono from a firm that's going to make prettier ones for us now that we got more money. All right. Going faster. Okay. So if you combine that hospital video where time and space are not your friend, whether it's introduced by an accident or a ransomware event, if it's introduced by a lack of water pressure, when most of these water facilities are naked on the internet, they're on Shodan and Census.io, they have PLCs directly connected, no password at all. This isn't about a zero-day vulnerability. They're just accessible. Using similar equipment, sometimes running those TP-Link routers. If you could affect denial of patient care in one community, the whole idea of you maybe being okay is that you can get to the next nearest one. But that's probably going to go out the window pretty fast. It's about 2 to 4 hours from when water is lost till the hospital can't function. There's a presentation from our CyberMed Summit in DC last year where Dr. Natalie Sullivan breaks down exactly what fails first, second, third. So if anybody wants those, let me know. I'll tell you. Okay, so what's the best defense? This is where I'm so excited that friends of mine in the sphere of Idaho National Labs, through their cyber-informed engineering and consequence-informed engineering, might be able to give you some free training today after you have some pizza. So, is the best defense? No, it's not offense. Your ability to throw a punch is predicated on your ability to take a punch, and we cannot take a punch. So all this muscular attitude, let's start getting more offensive. Yes, of course we can attack them. We can't really take a counterattack. So it's an and. But usually people said shields up, shields up. We don't know what that means for how long and how much, but maybe it's not shields up. Maybe it's connections down. Maybe if you can't afford to protect it, you can't afford to connect it. That's controversial, but not every town is hyper-connected yet. And if you're on the cusp, this might be the thing that makes you say, let's hold off for a year or two. Or if you just recently did go hyper-connected, maybe preserve the ability to do downtime manual operations before you fire everybody and lay everybody off. Sorry. preach. Okay. But often it's going to be physical mitigations. We have, what was the quote from Rumsfeld? You go to war with the army you have, not the army you want. We have the equipment we have. So in a lot of cases, we're not going to be able to just upgrade it or just cyber it or just do zero trust or just do platitude. We might not be able to shut it off. We might not be able to go back to less connected. So I think I'm going to take an opinion here. I think INL has the most available, familiar, affordable answers, which is buried in a subset of the very massive CIE program. I think the best answer is oversimplified equation from Ginger. Stand up, Ginger. Wave to everybody. Ginger's going to help train us later. Woo! I'm stealing this ugly slide and making it even uglier, and said, on this equation, if you want to reduce the likelihood of a successful cyber attack, you cyber up. But if you want to reduce the consequences of that compromise, you add engineering. So I'm going to lean into that second half of the equation here. So most of these towns do not have a clue how to cyber up. They don't have a budget to cyber up. So back to the question about 60 minutes, you could spend $50,000 and hope you could do hand-to-hand combat with the Chinese military. Or you can spend $2,000 to $4,000 on a pressure sensor arrestor that is like a circuit breaker, but for water. These are known to professional engineers in water facilities. They're familiar, they're implementable, they're affordable. They're not perfect, but if a punch is thrown, maybe we could take a punch. So we're going to be, through this project, seeking familiar, affordable, reliable, proven physical mitigations for the time being, so we can take a punch. Yeah. Battlefield tourniquet. Yeah. So if you'd like to know more about that, I have two things to say. Three. One, this is a book on how to do cyber informed engineering for water that you can get from our friend Andrew Ort, who spoke. Number two, was one of our speakers at B-Sides Las Vegas. I am the cavalry track on day one, and it's recorded, so you can go watch that entire talk. And number three, we're going to have a 2-hour version of a crash course on how to use CIE for water for your town tonight for 2 hours with pizza in your belly, because we're smart. Okay, let's play that game one more time. This is the hardest version of the game. What's more important, provide water or provide medical care? All right, yeah, no water, no hospital. You guys got that right the first time. Too smart. What's more important? These get harder. Repair the water main for the dialysis center on the west side of town, or the trauma center on the east side of town. Yeah, this is ruthless prioritization. Those dialysis patients will die. So we're not talking victimless choices here. It gets harder. What's more important? Repair the burst water main in the county that has one and only one hospital versus repair one of the downed hospitals that has 3 hospitals. So this one might, this is meant to show you the decision might not be your town's decision. It might be your county or your state's decision. And they're talking about it increasingly as we keep engaging them. There's a county I'm working with that there's no other hospital within 200 miles. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's other things like population, at risk, yeah. But I guess the illustrative speed round here is it may not be up to your town. Which is more important, removing exposure, adding cyber, or engineering down consequences? It's kind of an unfair question. It depends. Philosopher. So back to this, and we've had such good interaction. I've gone long, so I'll have to do some Q&A during the things. Here we go. So to take some pressure off the RSA people that I made feel really, really guilty, because you could feel this oxygen sucked out of the room on that first time I showed this slide. Let's figure out why did this happen real quick. So Wendy Nather has this fantastic line of some people are living below the security poverty line. That red thing is the security poverty line, okay? For the longest time, remember that quote about why do you rob banks, William Sutton? Remember the answer? Why do you rob banks? That's where the money is, right? So for the longest time, the attackers with the red crosshairs and the defenders with the blue shields, they focused on the Fortune 500, Fortune 5000. Why? Because that's where the money was. Ransomware was not a technology revolution. It was an economic one. Ransomware proved to attackers you can monetize anyone. The unavailability of anybody can be monetized. Little schools, little municipalities, doesn't matter. So we figured out how to monetize for the bad guys. The good guys still haven't figured out how to monetize the cyber poor, and they don't want to try. They've been told several times, how do we go down market? There's no money in it. So we have an unmitigated feeding frenzy on the down market. That's where most of our critical infrastructure lives, target rich, but cyber poor. So while Wendy's quote is awesome, the policymakers hated it. So I had to tweak it to call it target rich, cyber poor, where you're insufficient information and or incentives and or resources, most cases resources, especially in water. So back to that ruthless prioritization I did during COVID. I don't have to repeat this, but we did things that were not cyber up or best practices or zero trust. They were realistic, tractable things to buy down risk. So back to the security poverty line for these 3 lifeline sectors. One of these slides is going to hurt your eyeballs. I'll warn you right before I hit click. There are 151,000 water facilities in the US. Picture the number 151,000. Does anybody know how many members there are in the Water ISAC for Information Sharing and Analysis Center for cyber stuff? Guesses? 3,000? Who said that? Okay. 30,000. Okay. They have 650 members. That's 0.4%. The American Water and Wastewater Association is a trade group. They have 4,000 members, and it's the really big ones. And I said, okay, congratulations, you're 1.4%. So yes, obviously high population densities matter, but unlike NERC for energy, we don't have any laws for minimum cyber hygiene. In fact, it is such a cantankerous animosity relationship that in President Biden's time, when Ann Neuberger said there's a time and place to use regulatory authority, that time is now. If you're a regulator with unused or underutilized regulatory authorities, implement them. Start with the CISA cyber performance goals, which is the crawl stage of the NIST cybersecurity framework, and then layer on sector specific stuff. The EPA that week announced that as part of your annual sanitation survey, sanitation survey, you should inventory which of the 38 CISA controls you have in place. So just an inventory. 3 states said, how dare you, we're suing your ass. And they successfully cowed EPA, who will not dare to touch this for another 10 years. So we couldn't even muster enough will to inventory our munitions to do hand-to-hand combat when I just told you the PLA's in our water right now and could trigger it as early as 2027. So we have this is a generous little graphic there. Out of the nation's 6,000 surviving hospitals, there's about 300 in the healthcare ISAC. Energy does a great job. They have CEOs involved in the Sector Coordinating Council. They have Edison Electric up top for the bigs. They have NRECA down bottom for the small, medium, rural. You have APPA for the public power. I'm not saying they're perfect, but if we're going to converge to make sure our communities are more resilient, I think the energy people are going to be the mentor in the room, the elder sibling that's going to help out water and healthcare. So I said, let's not focus on 151,000. Here's the ugly hurt your eyeball slide. There's 6,000 of those water facilities touch a hospital. So I want to be very surgical. And this project is saying, let's look at the 6,000 hospital bearing water towns. So back to this thing, when everything's critical, nothing is, I'm going to go to the bottom of Maslow, these 4 categories. Food's a different kettle of fish for a different day. For the first year, we did the nexus and interaction of water and emergency care. Craig Newmark liked the results. Craig Newmark of Craigslist funded that initial pilot, and he gave us some more gas in the tank recently. You in the room can't help the national security posture, but you can help your house. And if you're not looking over your shoulder at your house, you can help your town. And if your town's pretty well prepared, you might be able to help your county. And there's ways that we're driving people to say, what can you do with your skills and interests for your town? And I could get into more of that later as well. There's a way to volunteer generically where a bunch of us that are funded by Craig decided to form the Cyber Resilience Corps. It's basically a menu of menus right now, but the vision is people with skills can say, I'm willing to help on these topics in these places. And people who need skills can go find and matchmake. It's really clunky right now, but it'll get better. Probably not in time for my Volt Typhoon, but I believe in digging this well for future thirst. This is Craig. We were trying to butter him up at RSA. At Critical Effect, though, he was really compelled. We took Bryson Bort's ICS Village nonprofit. He had a conference called Hack the Capitol. The DC crowd hated that name. So for the 8th one, instead of calling it Hack the Capitol 8, we took my Undisruptible stuff, his old conference, we merged them and add some urgency and some focus on lifelines. So we call it Critical Effect. Fantastic content across 3 tracks for 2 days, all recorded. And during the opening, he committed $3.2 million to do another 2 years of a much more aggressive theory of change. What's that theory of change look like? Well, the fire triad says if you want to stop a fire, to take away any one of the following 3 things: fuel, heat, or oxygen. I'm basically saying for a hospital to function in those 6,000 hospital towns, you take away water or power, we're in trouble. Yes, every hospital has a generator as long as you keep fuel going to it, but none of them have a water generator. So the weakest link is likely the water. So we're going to convene Team Voltron. There's 4 depicted here. I wish I had drawn emergency management for the state or the county, but we're going to convene these folks. We're going to brief them on Volt. We're going to run a crisis simulation of what's the worst that could happen. And then we're going to co-create INL, CIE, practical, familiar mitigations to make sure we can take a punch. What I told Craig is we could save American lives by getting on the ground with a dozen communities, helping them blunt the worst punch China can throw at their water, documenting what they believe before, during, and after, their successes, their failures, and their blueprints of resilience, and then scale them nationally within the time we have. So we had to change quite a bit. We thought we had an information gap. It turns out we have a motivation and enablement empowerment gap. So we're just going to help people across the finish line in 12 communities at a big budget. And if they can't even pay for the $2,000 thing, we will pay for it. It's just the budget. We're looking for diversity. There's several sub goals. The primary goal is surface enough of these edge cases in engineering solutions for different elevation, different population, different age of pipes and infrastructure, different leadership philosophies, some red and blue states. Like we're going to pick one in Indianola, Mississippi, because it's in a flood zone. Or we're picking some that are close to committees of jurisdiction in Congress that matter as well. And we're going to try to make sure that no community can say that doesn't look like me. We want to have enough diversity. If we have to do more than 12, we'll do more than 12. But we budgeted 12 for this project, and we'll do more. So what does that mean? Out of 151,000, 1/3 of them service homes, 6,000 of them service hospitals, and we're going to pick 12 of those to make them very safe. And then we're going to publish how do we make you very safe. And then just like PERT Plus from the 80s, so we're going to assess their actual worst case outcomes. It might not be a water hammer in their town. I can't assume that. We're going to co-create engineering fixes. We're going to capture their beliefs before, during, and after, and their successes. And then we're going to replicate widely, right? Innovate narrowly, replicate widely. So we have a couple successes. They tell 2 friends and they tell 2 friends, and maybe we get to the 6,000 hospitals. But if someone says we don't have a hospital, we have a dialysis center, I'm like, good, take the exact same process we use for that. And when someone says we have an AI data center, say, good, take the exact same process we did for that. So I'm going to go real narrow on hospitals and take people from red to blue. This means everybody speaks different languages, so we're going to do long form dialectics and capture these conversations about what do you mean by ICS? Because to me, ICS meant industrial control systems. To emergency management, it means incident command system. So we have a lot of jargon and namespace collisions. So we're going to talk these through. When we hit things that need explaining, we're going to make really lightweight, easy, stakeholder specific explainers. We're going to have 12 success stories to put in front of 60 Minutes. We're going to have 12 success stories to put in front of Congress on the right committees. And maybe, just maybe, we're going to keep telling China as publicly as possible, this is going to do a lot more damage than you might have thought. And maybe they hesitate, maybe they miss an infield fly, maybe they don't. But I got to do whatever I can with what time I can. And I'm not going to wait around for the military or the government to save us. So hopefully, this other 80s movie reference, but you might be the thin cyber line for your town. That should bother you. It should scare you. And the best skill you could pick up might not be more cyber. It might be to take some of the incident command system training so that when the time comes, you can snap in because you're familiar with community emergency response. It might be learning EMT skills. It might be getting good at Meshtastic so you can have non-terrestrial comms. In fact, one of our volunteers is making blueprints for here's the minimum viable purchasing and configuration you should get for Meshtastic for the water, the power, the hospital, based on your town's geography. Solar power. So there's different things each of you could do so that we can help those 6,000 hospital town. We had a 3-day track at B-Sides Las Vegas, which includes tons of stuff. Given the talk we saw, our first talk today about some of the power stuff, Dr. Emma Stewart from Idaho National Labs gave an terrifying talk on how AI data centers are so complex with load differentials that only AI can handle AI data center differentials. So paradoxically, we need more AI to keep us safe from the damage from AI. And you don't even need an attacker to cause severe physical harm to the local infrastructure. So water is a constraint, but power differentials. Yeah. Yeah. So we have quite an interesting array of talks here, including how to protect your household. Again, my focus is hospitals. No water, no hospitals. No kidding. I have tons of stickers for you here. I hope I brought them. Different flavors of stickers like water hammers, because no one remembers how to spell undisruptible later. So when you look at your sticker in your bag, you'll remember. And there's other angles here. Most of it's not federal. Most of it's going to be National Government Association, NACIO, NACHIO, state level emergency management. The Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity has university clinics across the country. We're looking to maybe scale those or make some OT specific, smaller time commitments. I'm trying to get CyberActive to do their part. I'm trying to get Congress to maybe have a ban on TP-Link routers and other bad edge devices, or maybe a cash for clunkers buyback program that if you're using one of those, liability is way overdue. The most likely thing they'll probably do in the executive branch is a named operation like Operation Warp Speed, where we might actually get cross-sector fusion center like my team did for the vaccines and for hospitals. But they're not currently acting in a way that prepares them for one of our most disruptive campaigns that is very probable. Because remember, if Xi says, if you interfere with Taiwan, we're going to knock you on your ass, and we have to interfere with Taiwan, therefore we're going to get knocked on our ass. I would like to be able to make sure the highest consequence failures that we could take those punches. So it's not only water hammers, but think water hammer. Think INL, come see the training after pizza, because you are in fact over dependent on undependable IT in a lot of places. Somebody want that? You wanted that, didn't you? I saw you. We are over dependent on undependable things. That's just where we are. I wish it weren't the case. Maybe we can make it better. But for now, we got to be smart. And way more than 12 years ago when I first uttered this, the cavalry isn't coming. The solution's sitting in your seat, or it ain't coming. So we're going to try to equip you with this project with blueprints and easy buttons and 5 questions to ask your town hall and as much documentation as we can. But this is not a spectator sport. So that's not the entirety of what the cavalry has been working on, but it is where we are right now. And I thank you for your time. I thank the conference for letting me have the time and the extra bonus 10 minutes. I'll take questions on or off camera for as long as you let me while the pizza's arriving, but I want to be respectful of the organizers. So there you go. So I don't know if the audio can hear all that, so I'll try to summarize. Why does this, given that they're already in infrastructure, why don't we say that we're already at war, or are we at war? How do we get people to think more about this hybrid conflict or non-traditional conflict? There's some interesting things to read if you haven't read them yet, called Unrestricted Warfare, from some of the leadership in the Chinese military, about how they think about this, and it's very different than how we think about it. And this makes a ton of sense if you're familiar with that doctrine. What they're doing makes a ton of sense. It's not just them, though. I'm equally worried about flare-ups with Iran or Russia. The most likely timing is the one I'm focused on. Yeah, we need better storytelling. We use a lot of jargon. People don't understand it. Even that video, the draft video, makes me cringe every time I hear it because it says successful cyber attacks. They're not attacks. They're initial access campaigns. They haven't done any damage yet. And one of the reasons people don't give a crap about this yet, or they're more concerned with Salt Typhoon instead of Volt Typhoon, is there's no cyber insurance claims yet. There's no, we lost $10 million because of this attack yet. It's an incomplete attack. But think about this, this is not the right way to put it, but I often say, if I were to hand you a remote, like a device with like an antenna on it that had like, it looked like a bomb, and I just said, here, hold this during my presentation, and I have a little remote control, I'm like, don't worry, I won't press the button. Don't worry about it. Like, you would not feel comfortable holding something that has the potential to harm you, whether I was actually harming you yet or not. So these are essentially remote detonation charges at will that we're just kind of tolerating. You know, if you knew that vandals can get inside your house at any time, or they do come and go freely, but they've never hurt you or stolen from you, you still wouldn't feel good to have strangers in your house. So I'm reluctant to do some of this creative storytelling for the public until we have proven irrefutable what to do about it things. I think one of my complaints about the 60 Minutes piece is it says some true things, but it gives you no actionable shovel ready what you should do about it, questions you should ask, or steps you should take. So I don't think we get that many shots to shock or captivate people's attention. I think it's harder to shock and captivate people's attention now these days than it used to be. So we want to be really thoughtful about when we scale that up, but it's going to take some creative storytelling and metaphors and love languages that they understand, because they don't understand IOCs and attacks and cyber things and MITRE attack frameworks and PLCs and ABCs. So we use the water hammer in our narrative structure because that engendered trust with water engineers. So we're gonna have to use a different love language for hospitals, a different love language for power. And it's unfortunate and it's complex, but it's better than letting them be blindsided. So I partially answered some of your question, but it is outrageous, and that education has to happen, but hopefully proximal to remediation. Yeah, I mean, when I hinted that 85% don't have a single cybersecurity person, the people that do, they're spending almost all of it on HIPAA, and it doesn't keep anybody alive. But sometimes it actually puts you at greater risk. So the incentives are broken. We did a lot of the education for the executive branch in Congress. There were a couple bills introduced in the last Congress before the new stalemate, and there's more to be done. So I'm hoping to use this crisis as a good re-education opportunity to say we're spending on the wrong things, we're incentivizing the wrong things, and we have to do ruthless prioritization. But the truth is, the reason healthcare is dying is not cyber. Cyber's an accelerant. It's other factors. But there are some promising things. I'm going straight from here to UCSD. They got the ARPA-H healthcare grants to make something called a cyber crash cart. So there's some clever, cheap things where a ransom hospital, they can wheel in the stuff on a truck and stand up an alternative EMR to keep patients treated through the crisis to reduce delayed and degraded access to care. It's not perfect, but for a really small amount of money, a regional crash cart could maybe provide resilient continuity of operations. So the presence of attacks will continue, but maybe we can mitigate the harm by having clever availability and resilience measures, not privacy measures. And I love my privacy. I just like to be allowed to enjoy it. So I thank you for your healthcare service. It is not an easy situation. The incentives are all wrong. So we're not just going to have to fix this by cybering our way out of it, but we're illustrating. That's why that first video had almost nothing to do with Volt Typhoon. It just was trying to get policymakers to see this is not about privacy. It's time and space. Thank you.